everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have Julian Vayne. How are you doing today, Julian?
I'm doing very well, Joe.
Good. Glad we were finally able to make this work. I've been quite aware of your work for a while, and now we get to talk about it because there is an interesting happening in the UK. But before we dig into that, let's give people a little bit of an outline about who you are. You've written a bunch of books. You've got a pretty cool blog, blog of Baphomet. .com. Yeah.
Yep.
And you're pretty closely linked to a lot of what's happening in psychedelic research in the UK, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So I'm involved in a variety of different sort of projects. So back in the day, I was involved in helping people set up a thing called Transform, which is a post-prohibition policy think tank and pressure group. These days, I've got an involvement as part of the crew who run Breaking Convention, which is Europe's largest conference on psychedelic consciousness that happens when it's not being a pandemic in the University of in Greenwich in London. And yeah, I've written lots of things about this subject, coming mostly at it from the direction of the esoteric, the occult, because that's my kind of first love and my entry point to this sort of stuff. But I guess the thing I'm probably most well known for in this field is Getting Higher, the Manual of Psychedelic Ceremony. It came out a few years ago, which is exactly what it says on the tin. Yeah, designed to give people skills to work well with the medicines that they might encounter.
Very cool. And I just earlier listened to your podcast from 2020 with Treadwells and found some cool overlap. In a way, Aleister Crowley was your gateway drug. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of true for me as well. Like the importance of drugs kind of came forward after, like, I read plenty of Stan Groff and I was kind of convinced about LSD, but then Crowley opened up all these other horizons for me with drugs. And it was really interesting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you think about, Crowley is famous as the magician who took drugs and used drugs in his practice in a variety of ways in his life. But actually, if you go back to the history of the Western magical tradition, and the book that I recommend for people is Liber 420 by Chris Bennett, you'll see that there's a great relationship between substances that alter consciousness and the most Western magical tradition. So as well as all those kind of, let's call it shamanic kind of or entheogenic cultures that we're more familiar with, it's also part of this tradition, not just in people like Crowley, but in one of the first ever trip reports by a dude called Havelock Ellis, who wrote a report about his experiences taking mescaline. In the report, he describes how he gave mescaline to a friend who was an artist. Now, the artist was William Butler Yeats, who was one of the leading lights in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So now when you think of those Golden Dawn rituals, if you previously thought that they were a bit sort of quasi-Masonic and boring, even though they had like cool, colourful robes and the most amazing, highly painted vaults, you now have to imagine that they've all ingested large quantities of hashish. Yeats preferred hashish to mescaline. So it wasn't just Crowley. There was a whole bunch of people exploring that kind of territory. And of course, there were people that kind of rejected that very much. This almost kind of parallel in some respects between the what we might call the left and right-hand streams of Tantrism. So, these are still magicians, but there are people like Dion Fortune who are much less interested in the use of psychoactive materials and actively discourage their initiates from working with those substances. But then there were people like Crowley who brought those substances into the public sphere in rituals that he did. He wrote about them extensively. He wrote actually a big book about mescaline, which unfortunately was seized by British Customs and Excise and is presumed destroyed when he was kicked out of
Is that what happened?
Yeah. So this, as I understand it, this is just going from memory. He was kicked out of Sicily by Mussolini. It was like, no, you're a weird dude, get lost. And as he came back into Britain, that was one of the things that were seized. So it's claimed that the Cactus, which is what the book was called, was a compilation of probably something in the region of 400 mescaline trip reports. So when we think of Crowley, we think of coke, and we think of hash, and we think of heroin, and so on. But there was a really big kind of psychedelic strand to that magic, and of course that then ran on into the esoteric, the occulture of the 20th century and on beyond that point.
Right, and it's a mistake to underestimate the influence of Aleister Crowley on Tim Leary and therefore American culture and counterculture. So one thing I wanted to bring up, because this is, you being in the UK, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, especially with your deeper involvement with the occult than mine. But this idea that only a certain few cultures have a long-standing history of plant use or substance use for psychoactive effects. And to the best of my knowledge, there's a really long-standing history of use of psychoactives in Europe. So it's not just Peru, it's not just the Huichol in Mexico and, various psychedelic cultures. But could you speak about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There are some interesting presences and some interesting omissions. So in terms of presences, we've got the use of that whole family of solanaceous plants, so things like the what I kind of think of as the scary potato family. So all that whole kind of collection of plants that cluster around things like daturas and aconite and henbane in particular. If you go to the classic grimoires and you read all the instructions, and there's all these weird names and weird seals that you have to work with, and circles and scrying mirrors and stuff. The critical ingredient in a lot of these practices is what is in the incense. And so in the incenses, for many of those rituals, many of those practices, there would have been, in particular, henbane seems to have been a favorite, but also high doses of cannabis. Cannabis, as I mentioned in Chris Bennett's work, is shown, I think, very, very clearly to be an important aspect of the Western magical tradition of alchemy and so on. There's all those kind of stories about and accusations about the witches and the herbs that they were using. All of these substances that are kind of on the border between what we conventionally think of as perhaps just clearly poisons and mind-altering substances. So there were probably kind of interesting, localized, maybe within families, cultures of making use of these things for medicine and perhaps other practices too. The interesting omission is that there's very little information. Certainly, there's basically nothing that I'm aware of in the British Isles about the use of things like psilocybin mushrooms, which grow in profusion. I think there's kind of 4 species that grow native in the British Isles, and the Liberty Cap, Psilocybe semilanceata. That's a very strong, that's almost like 1% of psilocybin by dry weight. So it's a strong mushroom. There's no real record of those things being used for any kind of, esoteric, religious or cultural practices that we have in Britain. Now, there are some hints as we go further east and north of other mushrooms being used by different communities there. But we definitely know that things like datura, things like henbane, things like cannabis, things like opium, these consciousness-changing agents were by no means unknown. The phenethylamine family, so that's that kind of, those psychedelic amphetamines that we all know and love from things like peyote and San Pedro. To my knowledge, they don't appear certainly in Europe or in the old world, so there's no access to those. But there's kind of little pieces of hints within the folklore and within the kind of some of the iconography that perhaps some of those tryptamine psychedelics, things like mushrooms, were being used, in various kind of contexts. Obviously, what we have to think about is that there were great prohibitions that existed, culturally and from a religious perspective on many of these practices. They are dangerous in a variety of senses, both pharmacologically and also culturally. So we've got enough there to say, there was at various points a corpus of knowledge. Certainly, when we go back into the archaeological record, then we see all kinds of things opening up. We have the rituals at the Temple of Eleusis, very likely using some kind of psychedelic substance. It could have been a mushroom. Maybe that's why there's in northwestern Europe a bit of a prohibition against eating any of these things because they're all weird and potentially dangerous. Maybe it's from the Eleusinian mysteries. Maybe they use some sort of LSD analog substance. And we have certainly kind of archaeological evidence of, cannabis and, ephedrines and various other kind of substances being used within that kind of context. In fact, there was a recent archaeological find a few years ago from a temple of Demeter in Spain, I think it was, where it was almost like a smoking gun because a vessel was found and also a human mandible, which had evidence of some kind of ergot-based material present in both the vessel and also in the jawbone. So whatever was happening at Eleusis, whatever was being used, maybe perhaps this knowledge of a kind of ergot derivative LSD type chemical was there. So it's hidden and it's partial and it's fragmented, but nevertheless there are strands of this story that could be followed through the European tradition, let's call it, or the European story.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I actually got to meet one of the classicists who worked on that site in Spain, Denise Demetrio. Really interesting classicist in University of California, San Diego. In fact, I should email her later on. She's right around here. So next, the really interesting thing that finally got us hooked up was I noticed on Twitter that you were essentially banned from giving a presentation at the Oxford Psychedelic Society, ostensibly for having admitted to using drugs. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting and somewhat amusing story. So I'd spoken at an event organised by the Oxford Psychedelic Society, which is predominantly of students, though not exclusively. So that they'd had this kind of big one-day festival event, which was amazing. Sun Ra Orchestra, loads of performers. Wow. A whole bunch of us in a tent rapping about psychedelics. It was great. So we had this big event in 2019. And I got speaking to the person who was one of the organisers and said, "Oh, dude, I'd love to come back to Oxford and maybe we can do I could do like a lecture and then a workshop or something for people, whatever." So we kind of kicked around a few ideas, batted a few emails backwards and forwards, and it was determined that I was going to come and speak in the early part of 2020. But that didn't happen. It didn't happen not because of the pandemic, but because of something quite curious. So my friend in the Psychedelic Society, the Oxford Psychedelic Society, went looking for a room. Now, you have to understand, Oxford University is a big place that consists of many colleges. So what I'm going to say only refers to one particular college within the university. But he made an approach to the college to try and find a room that we could do this presentation and workshop in. And eventually he got an email back, and the email was quite amusing. The email was from a new member of the administrative team, and they said, "Well, look, we've looked at who your speaker is. We do this as due diligence, whenever somebody books someone from outside the university to come in and speak. And because of your speaker's comments on the record about illegal drug use," and I'm quoting, "we can't allow them to come and speak because of our duty of care to the students." Okay, yeah, exactly. You laugh because it's funny on so many levels. Yeah. I mean, firstly, we have the fact that according to a piece of 2018 research by the National Union of Students, something like 39% of students are using, let's call them controlled substances in this instance, kind of the drugs that they are not licensed to handle or that are not kind of available without there being potentially criminal sanction against them. So 39% of these students are already doing this stuff, it would seem, at least. The second thing that was amusing about it was that there's a kind of a Wonderlandian craziness about the idea that you can't have someone who has admitted that they've taken psychedelics come and speak to a psychedelic society in a university environment. That's kind of like it's like we're in some weird kind of double-think kind of scenario at that sort of stage. A third point is that they mention the idea of illegal drugs. Now, anyone who's interested in things like post-prohibition cultures or policy models or whatever, whilst we use terms like illegal drugs very frequently, it's quite important, I think, to unpick some of that language. So drugs in and of themselves, these chemical compounds are not and can never be legal or illegal. What's legal or illegal is whether or not you or I are allowed to possess those things, whether we can manufacture those things, whether we can supply or exchange those things to others. So it's our behavior that's about whether it's licit or illicit. And the substances themselves are controlled substances. So there are no illegal drugs. That betrays a misunderstanding of the way these substances are in culture. In addition to that, there was the fact that I'm actually, I like to think reasonably circumspect and thoughtful about when and where I say I've taken psychedelics. And pretty much the only place I've been really clear about the location where I've taken a psychedelic drug was in 2019, the early part of 2019, when I was a research participant in a trial at King's College Hospital in central London. So I've written about that, and there's a talk that I did for Breaking Convention that's on their YouTube channel about that experience. So in that instance, the drugs were in no sense illegal. It was a licensed trial. I took as it turned out, I think 25 milligrams of synthetic psilocybin. And it was all completely above board and completely acceptable for that thing to be happening. And that's one of the few occasions I think that I've specified where I've taken these substances. Because, of course, there are plenty of places in the world, plenty of circumstances and plenty of settings in which taking, for example, psilocybin is completely fine. It's completely fine. Then there were two other kind of aspects of it that were really funny. So the first one was a kind of historical aspect. So we mentioned Aleister Crowley earlier. 90 years before I was banned from speaking to the Oxford Psychedelic Society, Aleister Crowley, my cultural ancestor, had also been banned from speaking to the Oxford University Poetry Society. So there, no reason was given. There's various kind of conjectures, including from Crowley himself, about what might have been going on. But the fact is that he was banned as well. So this kind of like made me really amused that there, 9 decades later, there's this kind of like echo of the same behavior. Again, from my point of view, speaking as an occultist, there's the same kind of story going around the cycle again. And the final thing is what I was going to speak to the students about. So what I was going to do was I was going to do like an initial, hour-long lecture, and then we were going to do some practice, and we were going to be interested in how can we change our consciousness without drugs. So I was banned from Oxford University for going potentially to speak to the students about how they could get high without putting substances into their body. So we were going to do some, connected breath work, holotropic style breath work, whatever. Some other practices with rhythm and so on. So all those kind of levels of amusement and irony and so on were there. I initially tried to sort of say, well, I'm very happy to enter into conversation with this person and find out, if I can explain a few things. And then the pandemic hit. So I thought it would be funny just to take the lecture I was going to give and to put that into a kind of seditious pamphlet, the Banned Lecture of Getting Higher. Now, 90 years previously, Crowley had done exactly the same thing. He put his lecture into print and he donated the profits to the Oxford Poetry Society. So that's 90 years ago. So last year, I released my banned lecture and I'm donating all the profits to the Oxford Psychedelic Society. Oh. So that, Joe, is the story.
That's outstanding. That's cool. So does it feel like you're not going to be able to present at Oxford in the long term?
No, because I did a lovely Zoom presentation with a whole bunch of students from the Oxford Psychedelic Society and many others last week. I think it was.
Outstanding.
And in fact, obviously, amusingly, the whole thing's got more traction because of the ban than had I just kind of gone there, had a fantastic time, hopefully, with the people. We'd done some practice and done some chatting and whatever. It would have been great. But it does serve to kind of shine a light, I think, on some of these issues, notions of illegal and illegal drugs. The idea that, within an academic kind of context, I mean, this is a place, Oxford University, that's been creating and producing knowledge since the high medieval, right? So this is like a place where you should, if conversations can happen and if information can be exchanged and indeed critiqued, this is where it should be. So for that to kind of have the lid put on it so quickly and easily, it would seem, by I like to be compassionate and think that this was a new member of staff. They wanted to make their mark. They wanted to be seen to be doing good things. Perhaps they genuinely thought that, the students weren't already smoking weed and that I would lead them to, I don't know. I guess there's some students who haven't got access to the internet, but so that was the story. That's how it worked.
Incredible.
out.
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy how you played it. It's really impressive. The fact that you didn't just start throwing hate mail around is great. Like I probably wouldn't have the same kind of patience. But you're working towards an end.
I understand it, man. Do you know what I mean? I understand we it's very easy for us. There's psychedelics today, there's breaking convention, there are all of these things. There's this huge upsurge of interest and information about it. But we're still talking about a relatively small section of the population. And we're still talking about a broader context where, although it's changing, particularly in places like North America and certain states in Europe, certainly in Britain, we're still very much in the throe of the drug war. As we're having this conversation, there are people in my country who are having their doors bashed down so that police can go in and take their weed crop from them.
Right.
That's still a thing. And the other side of that is that the narrative about, evil drug dealers, illegal drugs, all the dangers that will flow from that is still very, very much around and in culture. And ain't no point getting cross about it. But in terms of trying to work to change those narratives and to challenge those narratives and gently and hopefully thoughtfully say, well, maybe it's not quite like that. So people who are very much embedded in those kind of those belief systems is a really important thing.
Right. And have you had the chance to meet David Nutt?
No. I think we've kind of encountered each other briefly at Breaking Convention, but beyond that, no, we haven't had a chance to hang out.
Right. I speak about his work quite a bit, that scale that he put out in the Lancet. And it's just so interesting that UK government just sacked him right away after he published it. And how immune some people are to new information. It's really fascinating.
I think there was a I can't remember it exactly from memory, but there's a conversation that David Nutt recounts where I think there's a minister or some sort of functionary within the government was saying, well, you can't compare the effects of legal and illegal drugs, using this incorrect terminology. And David Nutt was saying, well, but surely the reason that some things are, and I'm putting quotes around this, illegal or illegal, is because of their relative harm. And MDMA, I think his classic example is MDMA is less dangerous than horse riding.
Yeah.
But the minister sort of comes back and says, yes, but one's legal and one's illegal. And at that point, you're just in a circular loop. There's no hope of kind of breaking out, because if you can't use a reasoned, logical argument, even about something like harm reduction or relative harm and danger, then you are, as they say, on a hiding to nothing. You're not going to get anywhere within that kind of mindset. There's going to have to be some sort of radical shift to change how people are perceiving all of these kind of categorizations. Tobacco and alcohol and caffeine and chocolate and sugar are legal substances, let's call them, because of reasons of history and reasons of economics and reasons of their perceived harm and all kinds of things. But in and of themselves, many of those substances that I've just named are incredibly dangerous compared to something like psilocybin. So, we have to move the debate into a different kind of context. And that is happening. But it's also the case that the drug war is still in place in a lot of the planet. And anything that we can do as individuals and communities to change that, from the medicalized availability of these substances through to having greater kind of acceptance for them on kind of a cultural basis, religious basis, all of those kinds of narratives need to kind of come to the fore. The decriminalized nature movements in North America, all of that stuff, we have to use all the techniques that we have, partly because these things are really valuable. These are very, very valuable medicines. And we're having this conversation in the time of pandemic. And after this time, God's willing, as we move through and out of it, there will be lots of people with trauma. And there's no better way of helping people with their trauma than carefully and thoughtfully structured psychedelic therapeutic sessions, or the recreational opportunity to engage with these substances. You know, just like we kind of say to people, oh, you can smoke weed if you're feeling really suicidal or if you're feeling really very ill. And moving from that to a point where we can say, actually, you can smoke weed because you might like it. You know, that's a radical thing for Protestant and post-Protestant cultures to go through, because our relationship with joy, fun, the body, material substance is deeply wounded. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we'll do it.
Yeah, totally. It's a lot there. So first off, it's goofy hearing, you know, I get so used to living in Colorado where at the state level, cannabis has been legal for 7 years now. So it's just fascinating and kind of troubling, I guess, too, to like hear what's happening in other geographies. And
I mean, we have, Britain amusingly produces 44% of the medical marijuana on the planet.
Whoa.
So, yeah. So, under license by the British government, there is a company called British Sugar, who, as you might imagine, given their name, have a somewhat checkered history in terms of slavery and so forth. Yeah. So they have 18 hectares worth of greenhouse in the eastern side of the island, and they produce 44% of the medical marijuana extracts and substances that are used globally. Those are all exported because even though the British government changed the law or the guidance to allow doctors to prescribe cannabis for a limited range of conditions, they also cunningly didn't put any system in place to actually enable doctors to go ahead and do this. So most of this stuff, which of course is bound for export, the vast majority, amusingly, members of the board and members of the company who is the kind of holding company for the assets include people who are related to members of the currently sitting government and indeed the former Prime Minister, Theresa May. So you have a scam where the big gang, which we call the government, are allowed to produce vast quantities of cannabis in order to export that, in order to turn dollar. But anyone who's actually producing that in a small way within their own home or in their own garden or whatever is open to serious criminal sanction. And even though increasingly the British police, they take stuff away from people and then they just shake their head and they leave it and they don't bother, that's not always the case. And it's certainly the case that there are various people that, were they to have even a caution, rather than a conviction as such, that would have significant impact on, their well-being and their livelihood. At the same time, British Sugar are growing the majority of the medical weed on the planet on the same island.
Incredible.
So that's a thing, I mean, hypocrisy doesn't even really cut it.
Right. It's just gang activity.
Yeah.
No way around it. Yeah. It's similar to how British Airways has acted in the past and other big organizations. It's like the hegemony is alive and well. The empire is alive and well in the UK, probably in New York as well. Scary.
I mean, we had a change of legislation here, which was in, I think, about 2015, if memory serves, and it was a thing called the Novel Psychoactives bill, essentially. And what it was really aimed to do was that there was a perceived threat from synthetic cannabinoids, so things like spice,
right,
and so on, and that those were wreaking havoc within a number of communities. And that was really kind of problematic. So the British government decided that they would set up an inquiry into how they might deal with this issue. And I followed the legislation quite kind of closely, and I saw there were 4 models that were proposed to government. One was, well, we just kind of keep it as it is. Another one was, we have certain shops where people can buy this. Maybe there's some kind of licensing system where you can buy a certain amount or whatever. And then the most hardcore model which was to ban these substances outright, which is what they chose. Now, they went beyond that because the British legislature has always been kind of catching up on tweaking molecules. So here you've got MDMA, so you tweak it slightly. Now it's something else, or you take another phenethylamine, you tweak that, and it's a different chemical. So you have to pass a new law against that. So there were laws already covering analogues. But in this 2015 piece of legislation, what happened was this. Everything that stimulates your central nervous system, any substance that does that, unless it's alcohol or caffeine or tobacco, anything that is a central nervous stimulant that is being bought by somebody with the obvious intention that they're going to use it to get high, it's criminal for a person to sell it to them. So to give you an extreme example, if I go into, like a Botanica, an incense supply shop, and I buy some frankincense, and that's completely fine. Theoretically, under this law, if I go into the Botanica, into my incense supplier, and I say, "Hello, I'd like to buy a kilo of your finest olibanum, please, your finest frankincense," because what I'm going to do is I'm going to hotbox with it because I know that it has these effects where it will elevate my mood and it will change my state of awareness. If I were to say that to the person behind the counter, and they then sold me the frankincense, they would be criminally liable under the terms of this act. So the guidance on the law is really fascinating. It says, and this is pretty much a quote, it basically says, if a middle-aged man comes in to buy some nitrous oxide cylinders, he's quite possibly just having a nice cocktail party with his friends, and that's fine. But if a pimply youth with a baseball cap comes in to buy 1,000 of these, you shouldn't sell them to him because it's perfectly obvious that he and his mates are going to use them to get high. So we have this situation in Britain where anything, any kind of solvents, any kind of herbs, anything that can change your central nervous system in that kind of a way, it's defined in detail in terms of the act, it's all immediately illegal. So anything that might be created in the future is immediately illegal. Immediately criminalized, I should say, or rather the people who are selling it or indeed giving it away, they are immediately criminalized. So that's pretty hardcore, really, as it goes, So this, I look at places like Colorado and I think this is amazing. Please, please, please carry on this work, deepen this work, because Britain tends to follow what the United States does from a legal perspective. And although, the movement and the change in this isn't very rapid, there are various organizations, including the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group, so that's with the party in government at the moment, who are pressing for changes to this situation. It doesn't benefit anyone. The police don't want to enforce a lot of this stuff. It's completely pointless. We know that the best way of dealing with the difficulties that emerge from drug use are as medical and social issues, not as criminal issues. It's obviously the way to go, but Britain is definitely very much behind the curve at the moment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think there will be some developments. Totally.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. It can't go on, right? Like it's getting obvious, and even law enforcement themselves are getting a little vocal. Some of them in law enforcement saying this is a waste of time and it's making us look bad. We should probably not do it. Like I've heard stories about police in Netherlands picking up very high young people and just taking them home. No legal consequences whatsoever. And the idea of that happening in the States just blows my mind. It wouldn't happen here. You'd go right to the hospital, possibly to jail if you had anything on you. But in some countries actually want to serve their population in a nice way.
Yeah, you see, theoretically, it should be the case here because there's what's called the test of public interest. So if you're an 18-year-old who's just smoked too much weed or taken too many pills and you're a bit scribbled out and the police find you, is it actually in the interest of the public? That is to say, for the rest of the community, is it in their interests that you're busted? That 18-year-old is busted? No, of course, clearly isn't. It absolutely clearly isn't. By all means, do some kind of, intervention to ensure that young person's health is safeguarded, check what their well-being is. That would be a genuinely useful thing as far as the public interest is concerned. But the idea of busting them, arresting them, charging them, and so on, completely pointless, absolutely pointless. And there are certainly police forces in Britain who, although they are not mandated to do this, have said, look, we are not interested unless you are selling large quantities of cannabis is the example that is normally given. That's normally what people are referring to. Unless you're selling large quantities of this or obviously causing a problem for your local community, we are not interested. Just keep it out of our way. Now, that's a very British way of doing things, which is just to say, try not to say anything and we'll probably get away with it. It's still not really acceptable because it still means that communities of colour and other kind of communities on the outskirts of culture get targeted for things which other communities perfectly readily kind of get away with. So we still need to change stuff there. You can't just allow for this, mostly you'll probably be fine argument. You need to have much more radical changes within culture. And it's going to take time. It's going to take generations, basically. But I think we're getting to the stage now where, the Nixon's drug war, like people talk about it now as like Nixon's drug war, doesn't exactly set it in the best light, does it really?
It's not a full picture, but it's a good start.
Exactly. It kind of, that's where a lot of this stuff kind of comes from. It comes from this reaction in North American culture to radical changes that were happening in society and so on. But people are starting to hear, well, hang on, so they're using MDMA with veterans? Like ayahuasca can help people what? So there's this opportunity to use these substances which literally regrow brain connections and brain material and also end up with these profound mystical states, which it would seem are actually just embedded in human biology, and that those things lead to healing transformation for people. The word is out there now. And that's why it's really important to do things like the work that you guys are doing of just putting the message out and to ensure that message gets heard as well, not just by the usual suspects, but as broadly as we possibly can. Because that's how you change culture. And that's how you change culture. You embed things in it so that, 2 generations down the line, people will look back at some of these conversations and go, that's crazy. That's completely insane. Like, what? Really? It will seem outlandish. That's what I hope for.
Right. Like you're, again, to harken back to the Treadwell's conversation, you all had a really interesting conversation about witchcraft in the 1950s and how people had to really just hammer home the point. No, we also worship a goddess, and the woman is this woman over here is our leader. And it took, 50, probably at least 40 years for that to become slightly normalized.
I mean, if you look at, no one is saying that the situation is perfect, not by any measure.
Right.
However, if you look at something like, I don't know, man, I mean, go and watch some American TV from the 1960s or indeed British television, right?
Horrifying.
Look at the portrayal. Yeah, look at the portrayal of women. Look at the portrayal of people from, other kind of ethnic backgrounds. Man, it's like if I show any of this stuff to my kids who are like teenagers now, they're like, what? Is this real? Is this like a real thing I'm seeing here? Culture changes, and the way it changes is by kind of putting out messages, putting out these ideas and putting them into like a number of different registers and a number of different languages that people can understand and that they can relate to. And that's what we need to do. We also need to, as far as we're able within our own circumstances, to say, yeah, actually, I've used psychedelic substances and I found them healing, interesting, spiritual, and, to quote Bill Hickson, I've laughed my ass off. So, to be able to kind of say, and yes, of course, these things are potentially problematic, potentially dangerous, potentially, they're medicines, and medicine is like that. It's only the poison, it's only the dose that makes the poison or not, like Paracelsus says.
Right.
But these are not substances that are either inherently illegal or are inherently dangerous in the way that most people use them. And most people use psychedelics and other substances still in the context of the drug war in the worst possible circumstances. Like if you're tripping on acid in Britain, right, and you have a problem, like you said, it's you're not going to feel comfortable engaging with a medical professional because there's all that whole kind of stuff. If a problem comes up for you, either in the experience or after the experience, because you're in this criminal kind of setting. We're in a situation where you take that pill in a club, you don't know what's in it. You've got absolutely no idea. Not really, Maybe you've done some testing. Maybe you can see that it's MDMA, but there's all kinds of variables in there. And even allowing for the fact that we are in a way, the worst of all possible worlds for many people, even then, the number of people who have difficulties, particularly with things like psychedelics, is incredibly small. And the number of people who find themselves with serious health issues or who tragically die, terrible though that is, it's actually very, very small, given the fact that people find it very difficult to seek help. There's no labeling on any of this stuff. There's kind of cultures of misinformation and disinformation. And yet these things are so safe. They're much, much safer than a lot of the things you're going to get over the counter at the pharmacy by a long way. And we can see that just because of the context in which they're taken, the context in which they're used, and the relatively small number of people that have any problem with those things. So we can find ways of dealing with it, whether we deal with it with licensing or whether we have the equivalent of a driving license or something that you have to take in order to be able to have these things. Who knows how we do it? But we do have to find a way to intelligently deal with the fact that we live on a planet with all of these substances, all of these medicines, various descriptions, and people want to engage with those for all kinds of different reasons. We can't simply say this is forbidden. Like book one of the Bible exactly. Book one of the Bible starts with some dude going, "You can have anything you want except this one over here." Like that, it goes wrong within the first few chapters. So, like, it's not a strategy. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So you have to come up with some other models, and you have to come up with some other approaches.
Absolutely. Yeah, the post-prohibition problem is a big deal. I've been in debate with Vinay Gupta in London about this a little bit, and he's have you run into this guy?
Yeah, I know
Vinay. Really interesting dude. Surprisingly esoteric. Didn't know that about him before I started talking to him. Thought I was just going to talk about hexayurt and cryptocurrency, and it was very different. But he's a little hesitant about a post-prohibition for psychedelics. He's pretty hardcore that we need this like pilot's license or some sort of government endorsement before you can hold certain drugs. And I'm like, it's a hard transition. Like this transitional thing that we're in right now is a really complicated deal because we don't want people going to jail. We also don't want people getting hurt. So it's like, how do we do this at the same time?
Yeah,
it's a really interesting thing.
It is a really interesting thing. I mean, it's and it kind of strikes to the heart of a lot of issues. So I was talking to a friend of mine, another magician called Dave Lee, and both he and I kind of make incenses and stuff. And there's a resin that you can get called oak moss, which is used in perfume, and it's used to kind of fix perfume. It's a very kind of deep noted smell. Now you can't buy this any longer in the British Isles because it's an irritant. Now, that's really interesting, isn't it? So you can't buy the substance because it's potentially dangerous. But of course, there are loads of things that are potentially dangerous. Right. So what do? You either start to limit people's access to things, and maybe you allow people to buy oak moss if they have a license, if they've demonstrated a degree of competence. And or what you do is you help people make wise and informed decisions and know how to find and critique information successfully. Now, the latter strategy is to some extent quite problematic because, our education system by and large is not aimed at doing that. Not certainly compulsory school education. It's designed essentially to have, and I speak as someone who's an educator that works a lot in schools and so on. It's predominantly designed to get people enough intelligence to work the machines, but not so much that they'll start doing anything that you don't like. And that's not actually how the best strategy for getting people to learn. Learning strategies of understanding information and learning abilities to kind of critique and how you source and find the data that you believe is valid and how you validate those things. All of those kind of thinking skills, that's actually what you really want. Now, to try and encourage those sorts of behaviors and those kinds of capacities within your population might seem to be just a potentially a problematic thing to do, let's call it. Rather like if you look at the history of mass literacy and you look at how there were huge power blocks who were violently opposed to the idea of mass literacy. And then they were opposed to the mass literacy of girls, or the mass literacy of other kind of social groups or ethnicities or whatever. And so what do you do? Do you go, you have ultimately to kind of realize that the power has to be placed into people's hands and you have to empower people to make those good decisions. It's very, very difficult to do. Yes, there are, if you think of something like LSD, there it is, it's basically pretty much tasteless and colorless, in its liquid form. There is this substance. You could do some really nasty things if you had LSD and you had a mind that was suitably twisted up. And sometimes those things happen because that substance is actually already available to lots of people. So maybe there is some kind of licensing process. Maybe there needs to be some kind of regulation, partly because we live in a big culture. If you're a kind of within, I don't know, a community or a cultural envelope where the structures are very different, then maybe there are other ways of handling this. But we will ultimately have to come up with law of some form or another if we still stay within this kind of law paradigm. And I personally have issues with this at a kind of bigger philosophical level, but we will, allowing for those kind of issues, we'll have to come up with ways of framing this. These may have to be completely novel. They may have to be completely new. Like we've got models like licensing. We've got models like, decriminalization, where basically you kind of let everything happen and you don't bust people unless they get over a certain amount of, money or drugs or, whatever's going on. But we will have to come up with these, and we're going to have to figure out these strategies. We've kind of painted ourselves into this corner now. And it's only us going to get ourselves out of it, So, I mean, licensing is something that I think in the Politics of Ecstasy, Timothy Leary talks about.
Right.
It is the most obvious way to go, because if you say, I drive a car, okay, so I'm only allowed to drive I can only use this vehicle if I've got a valid license. It means I've taken a test, and I know what to do. There are then various laws that govern how I might drive. And if I drive dangerously, I could have my license revoked and I could even be put into jail. Now, there's a similarity. It's not an exact equivalence, but there's a similarity between having, say, a car or a gun or a bottle of acid. Yeah, because there are similarities and there are also differences. One of the questions, of course, ultimately becomes things like who watches the watchman? Who is the validating body? How do we know that this there aren't all kinds of other sort of forces moving within culture to allow or disallow various people to have these substances? I'm very supportive of the fact that medics, people like my friend Ben Sesser is able to make use of MDMA, ketamine, and various other things in his practice. He's a lovely guy. He absolutely cares about his patients. He wants to bring these medicines to into their setting to use them. And of course, in the British Isles, it's the medical treatment is free at the point of provision. So there isn't quite the same issue about money making and access that perhaps there is in North America. Mm-hmm. So I want him to have access to that. But I would also like to see, a group of friends who want to go and grow their own mushrooms and then hike out, into the woods and take their mushrooms. I want them to sit there around their fire, having a great time, knowing that no one's going to rock up and bust them, including somebody who says, look, only doctors can have this stuff. That's not cool either. That's why things like the decriminalized nature movements are so powerful, And I know sometimes people polarize these things and say, it's like we've got to either decriminalize nature or medicalize and legalize or whatever.
Right. I think it's an ecosystem approach. Like we need all these different people doing all this different stuff, and I think you're spot on there.
And yeah, we just have to find these strategies to and you know, who knows? I mean, I think that psychedelics might be the return of those into Euro-American culture, let's call it. The return of those substances into that setting, which has really only been going on for, you know, really since the latter part of the 20th century. So it's not long, it's not many generations. Maybe that ultimately, I like to think, perhaps though, as more people have those experiences and as more people encounter those medicines, perhaps that will change the whole of the cultural envelope from one which is predicated on you can't trust people. So, you know, your first reaction is to ban anything they can get high with and ban even the oak moss perfume that they might tip on their fingers and it might irritate their skin. Like if you start from that presumption that everyone is you know, incompetent and or dangerous, then that's sort of, there's this kind of certain cultural mindset in that. And maybe as psychedelics come into our culture and they start changing people's minds and changing their behaviors and their way of being in the world, maybe culture will come up with new ways of doing this that aren't anywhere near framed within those kind of draconian, you know, you can have it, you can't have it, this is the law, this is licensed, this is unlicensed, whatever. Maybe we'll find other models and other ways of approach, perhaps even to law itself.
I would hope so. Yeah. All right. It's a quick plug again for Vinay's idea here of, so we do this license model and then we slap on insurance. So like in the US, certain states, you're required to have insurance to have a car. Might be the case in UK as well.
It is.
Lowers your personal liability. It like covers you a little bit. And, you know, why aren't we doing this with guns and drugs? Like that seems kind of quite logical if we go this license route.
Yeah, I mean that would make sense, wouldn't it? I mean, in Britain, you have to have insurance on your vehicle in order to drive. The insurance will vary depending on the kind of vehicle that you're driving. So if you're driving like a high-end sports car and you're 17, then the premium, the amount of money you have to pay for your insurance is going to be incredibly high.
That's the DMT insurance versus the MDMA insurance.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you know, it's like, okay, so you want to buy like a gram of 5-MeO DMT or of N-Bome or of any substance that could be, you know, very powerful. Yeah. So that's gonna require a lot of this insurance. Some of the issues there, though, is that, I mean, again, we've got these kind of models that involve, you know, so what are we saying? We're saying that if you're rich, it's no problem, and if you're poor, it is. So that's a thing. So we have to think about that. We have to think about whether we have other criteria in there in terms of, you know, if you're rich, okay, you might get more driving lessons, but the fact is you will still have to do the same test. And you still have to show that you're competent in that test to handle the vehicle safely and successfully. So maybe there has to be some kind of other process where, you know, the individual has to represent themselves and how they want to kind of work with these substances and so on. Maybe that's a thing. The problem I have with that is that a lot of the use of psychedelic substances is what we might simply call recreational, you know? And I think that those kind of models, they come from a place of kind of a professionalism. Now, whether that's medical or whether or not that's, you know, the official shaman. This is the official shaman in the village. So I'd like to make sure that, you know, those access points can be as inclusive as we can possibly make it, you know? We have to understand that these substances, yes, they have medical benefits. Yes, they have spiritual significance, and also they're fun. Like most people who take ayahuasca, you know, people take ayahuasca kind of, they go on about like, oh, I had this spiritual vision and I had this thing and stuff. It's like, oh, you're going back next week? Yeah, I'm definitely going back next week. Okay, so at least at some level, it's a pleasure. Yeah, potentially, even though it might be difficult, it might have these problematic kind of, you know, going through the underworld kind of stuff in it, but also people enjoy these things. And again, it's like saying, if I go to buy that frankincense and I say, hello, frankincense seller, hello, Botanica owner, I'm going to use this frankincense because I know it will elevate my mood and I want to have some so I can have an elevated mood. It's that makes it criminal for them to sell it to me. So the fact that I want to have a pleasurable experience is immediately problematized by our culture because, you see what happens, it's dangerous, isn't it, when people start having a nice time or can lead to all kinds of things. It's like that. So there's a whole bunch of tacit cultural assumptions in there, which maybe as psychedelics get more into the mix, maybe that will be challenged in the same way that psychedelics challenge things like, body-mind duality, this Cartesian nonsense about, what is it? Is it physiological or psychological? What the hell? What? I mean, what do you mean? What?
Yeah.
Nonsense.
Yeah. And it's, how do we, your points are great because it indicates that even if we put in all this stuff, there's still prohibition. And we want to make those gates low enough so that we have high levels of public safety with this stuff. And if prohibition keeps persisting, through, extortion type taxes, like in Colorado, taxes on legal cannabis are pretty high. So there's still a big black market. Thus, possibly some really bad stuff is in the cannabis. Largely that's not the case, but there are operations like that. And, like if MDMA and LSD are now, you could go buy it at the store with your, permit. There's no reason why a black market seller wouldn't try to sell to people at a cheaper rate if they're making money from it.
I mean, you can have a model. Again, this is like a licensing model, but with slight variation, which is that you might say, okay, so in Britain you can brew your own beer or make your own wine, but you can't do distillation unless you have a license. Partly because stills are dangerous things. They have a habit of exploding. Yeah. And they're also quite possible that they'll pump out forms of alcohol, ethanol, which will be incredibly dangerous to the health of people who might drink that substance. So a model would be something along the lines of, you can cultivate this many cannabis plants yourself, and that's fine. And if you want to kind of, share those with friends and family, blah, 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 that's totally fine. But as soon as you start like selling this stuff, or even you start to sell it above a certain level, or you start processing it in certain ways, then you must apply for a license. So in the same way, you can cultivate so much psilocybin for yourself and your friends and family, and that's cool. But the moment you start actually actively selling this stuff, so you're going outside of your immediate kind of friendship network or community, and you're now providing a product in the way that, capitalism understands these things, at that point, the state steps in and says, well, in order for us to ensure that this product is safe, we will have a licensing model which will allow us to inspect and to product check and so on, and also to deal with any problems that might arise. So if you're growing your own psilocybin, that's cool. But if you're selling large quantities of it elsewhere and or you're creating some kind of preparation from it, then the licensing might kick in. I mean, I kind of like a model that's something along the lines of that. At least at the moment, that's where my thinking is, because I would like to see. And I've spoken to people. I mean, I think it's in Czech Republic at the moment. That's basically the model.
Cool.
That seems to me a very, very kind of civilized and sensible way of doing it, because it means that the general cultural backdrop is that these things are okay, and it only becomes a matter for the state when those things start to be produced in particular styles and or that they are being sold for an economic kind of gain. And so there's issues of, quality control and all that kind of stuff. That might work. Something of that order might work. I mean, I don't know what the situation in Colorado is, but I mean, if you have licensed producers and their weed is more expensive than the black market producers, and black market weed is totally fine, who are you going to go with? But also, wouldn't it be cool? I mean, I don't know how the law stands. I mean, could you just grow 3 plants for like your quotes personal use?
Yeah, they had 6 plants per adult in Colorado per household. Okay. So I could have 12 here. Some people can have a gazillion,
Yeah.
That's decent. But the aspect of the stores is great because you're like, you rolling down the street and you're like, oh, you know what? I would just like to have some right now. And you don't have to call your person and plan ahead as much as you used to have to.
And also the thing is that if you get a problem, so like the vanishingly small number of people who appear to have like a cannabis related, mental health difficulty, or that they're using it in some kind of way where they're using that to cover up their suffering because there's some other kind of underlying issue. This stuff happens. It happens with every substance to some extent. That those people can then go and seek support. Or there can be interventions and support for those people without them being anywhere near like criminalized.
Absolutely.
What was the point of that? What's the public interest in that? How come? Why would this be valuable? There's a person who's like smoking too much weed because they can't cope with the fact that, I don't know, they're a caregiver to somebody else who's very unwell, and they're really overburdened by the whole thing.
And you might be locked into that program for 8 years, and so what? That you need to smoke weed.
Yeah. So people find themselves in those situations. Mm-hmm. If they are criminalized, of course they're not going to reach out to anything else, anyone else. Mm. So we have to have that as a general cultural backdrop that these things are not bad. Not only are they not illegal, but they're not bad.
Yeah, that's a new angle we've been kind of playing with. Is that we who did I steal this from? Probably Robert Anton Wilson. Like, we are the culture. We're not the counterculture. We are the culture, like this is the real culture now. And if you're a therapist or psychologist and you're not up on psychedelics, you need to get there. People are doing this stuff at an ever accelerating pace, and you are going to run into clients that need help. No doubt.
Yeah. I mean, it's ambient in culture. There is now the psychedelic genie is firmly out of the bowl.
Very much so. Yeah.
It's just this is the way that the whole situation is going. Mm-hmm. And I think that the prospects of the way that this might change the way medicine is done, the way that therapeutic work is done, the way that it might allow a whole bunch of people to re-engage in their own religiosity or spirituality in a way that is that doesn't have to be that's about direct personal experience of the sacred, whatever that means to them. The idea that people can realize that the quote normal state of consciousness in which you live is only one of many possible states. Frankly, loads of people, I mean, the situation in the US I think is more dramatic than here, but lots of people are taking various substances to just kind of get through their day, prescription drugs of one form or another. And these substances, psychedelics in particular, have really, really great potential to change that. And maybe they will also, like I say, that as these things come into culture, maybe they will, over time, they will change the way that the whole of culture operates. It's like Terence McKenna says, we're not dropping out here, we're infiltrating and taking over. And that's very much the case. I know people who've written on pieces of research work for government agencies about prohibition and coming up with other models. And a lot of those people are very much part of what I register as my community. So the work is being done. The work is definitely being done.
Yeah. We need more work being done. But yeah, absolutely. Like, I think this is a rallying cry. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a researcher. You can go into policy work and do some really interesting, meaningful stuff. And, you don't have to really make a tremendous sacrifice to become a medical doctor to do this stuff either and help people. There's so many avenues here.
I think also just on a personal level, being able to, whether it's just with family, with friends, with colleagues. Like I work in a gallery, and I was talking to one of my colleagues who suffers from migraine headaches. And so I pulled up the Wikipedia entry on migraine, and they knew that I'd been part of the psilocybin trial. So I said, it's interesting that you've got migraine. What are you taking? Right, okay, that's interesting. That's one of the kind of precursor chemicals that's used in the manufacture of LSD. And they were like, what? I said, yeah, come and have a look at this. So we kind of went through the stuff, and I was going, so we were talking about their illness, and we were talking about the way that these medicines can be used, not necessarily at the level whereby you're tripping, but at these kind of low microdose thresholds in order to help. And you could see this person who's, relatively, let's call them straight, this person kind of going, oh, right. Oh, I see. oh, and that was like that thing that, yeah. And I'm, here I am back behind my desk doing my stuff. And like, it seems, I haven't gone all completely crazy and whatever. So just by, what in Christianity would be called bearing witness, just by saying, well, actually, this was my experience, or, I had a friend who did X, Y, and Z. And just those messages going out there into culture, like this little ripple on a pond, changing things. That's how we do it.
Mm. So we didn't really get into the fun, esoteric, and ritual stuff. We're at an hour already, but the prohibition talk is super important, and I think we need more of both. But I'm wondering if in a couple minutes you can kind of like talk about how we can use ritual to perhaps steer our experiences more intentionally. Or however you want to touch that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as I said, I come to this field as an occultist, as somebody who's interested in magic, which I generally like to define as the technology of the imagination. And the way that has a relationship with psychedelics is that psychedelics are substances that we can ingest in one way or another, and that they create this very plastic, malleable state of awareness. And so if we then use technologies, so that can be what we might call things like ceremonial processes, mm-hmm. And we can use those things to hold, to direct, to help with the safety, and also with the opportunity to kind of push our experience in a variety of kind of different ways. So the whole thing about set and setting is essentially about creating your ritual container. So there's the setting, and doing certain mental processes, and that's the set. So if we take techniques such as smudging your room, getting an incense stick, taking it around your room. So what that does is that's a definition of territory, and it's also perhaps a ritual which you do that within your belief system is about cleansing the environment, right? So that's a way ritually of changing the setting in which you're going to take the substance. And then you might have a set changing process, so something that changes your internal mind state and allows you to work with the substance well. So a simple example of that would be to use a particular style of breath. Maybe you do that breath which, you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, you breathe out for 8. This will have all kinds of effects on the vagus nerve and the serotonergic system. It will relax you, but also allow you to maintain a kind of focus. And bringing that repertoire of techniques together, these kind of things that are outside of ourselves, the idea of you're going to do some tripping in a room. So what you do, as well as putting the incense around, you clear physically the space. You set up like let's call it an altar. It doesn't have to be an altar, the nature table, whatever. You set something up that that in the psychedelic state, the pine cone that's on there and the shell that are on there are going to become the pine cone and the primary, goddess shell or whatever it's going to be, So we use those techniques and ritual, a lot of ritual processes, a lot of the stuff that you see within the Western magical tradition and within other cultural kind of envelopes of creating sacred space, the kind of use of body techniques and breath techniques and so on. Those are exactly what you need when you work with psychedelics. Yeah. So you take examples like, the current psychedelic vogue for therapeutic settings is that you've got the eye shades on and the headphones. And in fact, there's a piece of research came out quite recently about what music is best. And interestingly, and rather amusingly, your classic sort of psilocybin playlist of Western classical music does not, on the basis of a relatively small cohort study, seem to be the best music or the music that most people would like to select. What they actually tend to select is they tend to select things like overtone chanting, rhythmic music, this kind of stuff that the shaman dude would have been doing, right? So equally, we have this idea of like, well, we're going to make it dark. So when do most magic rituals happen? Imagine a witchcraft ritual. When's that happening? Is it in the daytime or is it at night? I think it's at night, isn't it? So let's imagine a ritual initiatory chamber. What's that look like? Well, it's probably a dark space, isn't it? Much like before we're born, and much like the temporal elusus, and much like, insert almost any cultural belief system, or whatever we want to call it, even down to the Freemasons, where you're bound and blindfold as you're led into the temple. So magic, the magical corpus of material, so all of those techniques which exist as very often the kind of, let's call them the kind of the hidden traditions within different religious streams. So Tantrism within what we might describe as Hinduism, or Sufi tradition within Islam, or the Kabbalistic tradition within Judaism, and so on. Gnosticism within Christianity, all of those kind of hidden traditions. A lot of what those are about is they're about facilitating or creating circumstances in which you can have this direct encounter with the sacred and the divine. And they often have techniques. The Sufis have got their spinning, the Kabbalists have got, complex visualization processes. You've got all these different kind of techniques that exist, these practices. And that's one of the things that, someone who's influenced by things like the chaos magic approach, I'm really, really interested in it. You can tell me about the philosophy, you can tell me about your ontology, you can tell me what your special name is for the shell that's on the altar. That's all good. But what do we do? How does the breath look? How do we sit? How will we move in this space? How will we orientate the structures, the iconography or the symbolism we're going to use in here? Like, what do we do? And the magical tradition is very, very much about practice. It's about, we draw the circle this way, and then we say these words, and then we do these things. It doesn't have to be prescriptive, and it doesn't have to be kind of about rote repeating what other people have done, because anyone who investigates this tradition at any level will eventually realize that it's actually, there's some underlying principles and processes in it. Things like sympathetic or mimetic magic. As I pour the water from the bowl onto the earth, so this thing within me that no longer serves me goes away, right? You do that when you're high. You do that when what we rather glibly call the placebo effect is at its maximum. That will have a profound effect. Yeah, just that act of taking the water from a bowl and pouring it on the earth, right? So all of those, the use of those symbolic activities and symbolic actions, which we see within religion, and particularly within those mystical sides of religious traditions, and indeed within kind of now, psychology and neurohacking and all this kind of stuff. That, for me, is the magical tradition, this interwoven tapestry of different techniques. And when we apply psychedelics as one of the fuels that allows us to alter our state of awareness, we can then take those techniques and we can use those to hold and frame that experience. And, that's an incredibly powerful technology. That's an incredibly powerful way of engaging with these medicines.
Right. It adds so much more context and depth. And I totally think it's something people should be checking out, because you can be an expert too. You don't necessarily need to fly to another country to meet a magical person. Like, you're also a magical person if you want to be. And
Joe, that's totally it, man. That's totally it. Yeah. I mean, if you think about stuff like, the hassles that Maria Sabina had when people started turning up at her house, basically, like, we have to be really thoughtful when we just jet off to somewhere else. No blame, no error. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something we just have to be really thoughtful about. And a lot of this stuff, this kind of magical and I know it's a problematic word, but like this kind of shamanic capacity or skill, that's a human skill, right? That's a human skill. And if you're in a Euro-American cultural envelope where, like me, you don't have a lineage, right? You just have to figure this stuff out. You have to learn from other people. You have to respect their stuff. You cite who your influences are. You don't try and pass yourself off as something you're not. But you have to put this together. And by autonomously putting this together for ourselves and our affinity groups, we're doing really, really important work. So if we find a way that works for us, those imagined 6 friends who are going off into the woodland to take their psilocybin mushrooms, who know they're not going to get busted because they're in some cultural envelope where this is cool, they know that their way of holding the mushrooms in their hand and speaking to the mushrooms, they don't need necessarily some dude in a crazy hat with feathers on it to tell them what to do, because they know that the mushrooms and the relationship between the mushrooms and their psyche and their evolutionary pathway, that's where the power lies. They speak to the mushrooms. They ask the mushrooms for help. Then later on in the evening, they're all sat around with a fire. Someone starts to make some freeform, quote, shamanic song, just like throat singing or whatever. Some people start the rattle. They don't need to know what the traditional songs of their ancestors are, because this is the traditional song of them in that moment. And it's about feeding the flame of the tradition rather than worshipping the ashes of it. And we're just surrounded by these broken forms and these tiny cultural kind of clues, but with the help of other communities who've been less disconnected from this medicine, and also but with our own guides and spirits and perhaps a good dose of good fortune, for us to recreate and refine these things and to make those fresh and new in every moment and every encounter. That's the way we've got to go with this.
Beautiful. Yeah. And Getting Higher is the book where we really get into this topic at length, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Cool. Short, relatively small little book, but hopefully something that has, I kind of wrote it as something that distilled a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about for quite a number of years. And I wrote it basically as a kind of, for people like me who don't have a lineage, or, I've been very fortunate to work with, people from North and South America and from India and various other places who have got those kind of entheogenic connections, but not everyone does. And that's fine. So, but just like a few little suggestions about how you might discover these things for yourself. That's what I've tried to do in the book, and try to make it really accessible. Yeah. So sometimes it talks about the substances as drugs. Sometimes it talks about them as sacraments. Sometimes it talks about them as medicines. And it deliberately does that, so it doesn't get locked into just one register, like you have to be a shaman to do this, or you have to be a clinician to do this. It's like, no, you have to be a human to do this. Everything else you can figure out from there.
Yeah, all that's required is DNA and a little bit of life going on.
That's it.
Cool. Julian, anything else you want to point out or mention before we kind of wrap recording here?
No, I think that'll do, really. I would say a big shout out maybe for folks who are interested in psychedelic writing to go and check out the Psychedelic Press Journal, which is, I think it's now... it's maybe 10 years old, I think, something like this. Produced, I think, sort of 3-4 issues a year. Really, really kind of cutting edge, amazing psychedelic writing. So I would go and check them out. They're the same publisher who produced Getting Higher. So yeah, Psychedelic Press UK. Do a little search, you'll find them. Maybe we can put something in the show notes or whatever.
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
That.
Yeah.
So the journal is really good, because the journal is a really interesting mixture of, you'll get like everything from, first person kind of trip reports through to, we were talking earlier about kind of philosophical stuff. There's kind of reprints of like really old and kind of, rare and interesting material. So it's a real nice, diverse kind of collection, a really good way of feeding your head. So Psychedelic Press Journal, I'd recommend that. And, stay tuned as far as things like, breaking convention and conferences and in real physical space are concerned. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. My suspicion is that we'll push this into 2022. But yeah, breaking convention, do you get a chance to come over for that one, Joe, then that'd be great.
I can't wait. I plan to be there. Hope I can be there. And hope to be in Exeter as well whenever that other conference happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Julian, thanks a lot. Let's chat for a minute after we wrap here. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on, and hope we get to do it again.
Thanks very much, Joe. Most appreciated. Cheers, man.